What's going on, everyone? It's Tyler. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to talk about the settings and how I set up the a6300 for YouTube and vlogging, filmmaking, and travel photography and stuff like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is the resolution. Now for video, I always shoot in 4K at 24p. Except for 120 frames per second, obviously shoot in HD. So from an exposure standpoint, you're kind of limited in video to two in-camera settings for exposure. Obviously you have the third is the shutter speed, but you don't really want to change that unless you're going for a specific stylized video. So you're kind of limited to two, which is ISO and aperture. On this camera, I keep it on auto ISO for vlogging and stuff like that, and I cap it at 6400. If I'm shooting, any kind of other more serious filmmaking or anything like that, then I will adjust the ISO based on the scene, and I'll use zebras and the histogram and stuff to help me with those to get the right exposure nailed down. For aperture, it all depends on what I'm trying to shoot, the style that I'm trying to shoot. I like to shoot in a lower aperture if I can. So for autofocus on this camera, I use, for the 24p, I use the autofocus drive speed as normal, and the sensitivity I have set to high. Now if I'm on 120 frames per second, I actually change the drive speed to fast, because when you slow it down, it won't show, really sudden focus pulls and stuff like that. It actually looks really natural. When autofocus is not an option, or if I'm using a manual lens or something like that, I do use focus peaking in the camera, and the focus peaking in this camera is awesome. I use the red color focus peaking, and I set the strength of it to medium. For me personally, everything I've shot, that's been a great color and a great strength for finding critical focus on manual focus lenses. So I've really bounced around on this camera for different color spaces, and First I used to shoot on S-Log3, but I found, especially in low light, that it would just fall apart really quickly. I have been shooting more in S-Log2, and recently even just shooting in Cine 4. I think both of those look really good, and I think Cine 4 does better in low light. So the last in-camera tool that I use is a time-lapse app. Now this isn't the Sony one, this is a free one that someone developed, and I'm super grateful for whoever you are. Most of the time I just shoot in JPEG and just try to nail the white balance in camera. Okay, so those are the settings that I use on the camera. Now what I've also done is I've kind of customized the buttons and all that kind of stuff as much as I could to kind of my shooting style and what I'm used to. Now my first camera was a Canon 60D, and so there are a lot of similar buttons and dials as there are on the a6300. So first thing is this little dial right here. I use this to change the aperture of the camera lens. It's what was the same thing I had on the Canon 60D, so it just felt natural for me to do it there. That's what I was used to. So over here on this camera, on the 60D, is the top dials I used to change my shutter speed. So I did the same thing here I used this dial right here to change the shutter speed, and it really works out in my favor for video because it's a little more out of the way and it's a little harder to turn than this dial on the back. So I'm less likely to bump that when I'm shooting video and changing my shutter speed. In the center, this center button right here in the dial, I have it set up to change the audio meters, the audio levels. Based on the camera or the microphone that I'm using, they all have different sensitivities. So, and if I'm outside or whatever it is, this is a really good way to change your audio levels on the fly. This custom 1 button I was telling you about, manual focus. I actually use this to toggle between autofocus and manual focus. When I hit this C1 button and I flip into manual focus, my focus peaking and everything is engaged, and I'm good to go. The C2 button I have set to white balance. A lot of the times I'll just leave it on auto white balance, and that's more for vlogging and stuff like that. But if I'm shooting something in a more controlled environment or what have you, or if I'm shooting something where I want to make sure that the white balance stays the same the whole time for color grading purposes, I've just assigned it to C2, and I can quickly change the different white balance settings. So the last little bit of customization that I've put onto the camera controls and dials is this guy right here. The custom 1 and custom 2 settings set up for 24p and slow-mo, so I leave the setting 1 for all my standard 24p stuff, and then I can flip over to setting 2, and boom, I'm right into 120 frames per second mode, and it's really seamless, and it's super helpful to just basically at the flip of a switch be able to go from standard frame rate to high frame rate. So super helpful there. And then for photography, I just go flip over to the manual setting right here, and those are the only 3 settings that I use on this camera, and except for maybe I'll flip over to the panorama one, but I don't really use that one all that much. It's kind of cool, but yeah, so that's my setup for those custom functions. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you found that informative or helpful. If you have any more questions about any particular setting, leave a comment and below, and I'll be sure to answer the questions. Or leave a comment below and let me know what your setup is and what your settings are and what you use. I'd love to hear that too. Anyways, if you found this useful or if you liked it, hit that thumbs up button. Maybe consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.